The Mirror's Curse, Part 1. It all started with an impulse buy. I wasn't looking for anything in particular that Saturday at the flea market, just killing time with my best friend, Rachel. The antique mirror caught my eye from across the dusty maze of stalls. Its ornate frame was carved from dark wood, worn but elegant, and intricate patterns of vines and flowers twisted around the edges like frozen tendrils. "That's definitely haunted," Rachel joked, nudging me as we approached. Her grin was mischievous, but I saw the way her eyes lingered on the mirror. It had a magnetic pull, like it wanted to be noticed. The seller, a hunched old woman with a shawl draped over her shoulders, seemed almost relieved when I asked about it. "Take it for 20, she said, her voice gravelly. "It's been sitting here too long." Rachel raised an eyebrow but didn't argue when I handed over the cash. The mirror was surprisingly light as I carried it to my car, its surface gleaming despite the overcast sky. I told myself I'd clean it up and hang it in my bedroom. It would add a touch of vintage charm, I thought. That night, as I mounted it on the wall opposite my bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the old woman had been eager, maybe too eager, to get rid of it. But the mirror looked beautiful in the dim light of my room, its frame catching the glow of my bedside lamp. I decided not to overthink it. The first few days were uneventful. The mirror was just a mirror, reflecting my scattered clothes, my posters, and the tangled mess of my hair as I rushed to get ready in the mornings. It wasn't until the fifth night that things began to feel wrong. I woke up around 3 a.m., that hazy hour when the world feels both too quiet and too loud. My room was bathed in shadows, and the mirror's surface gleamed faintly in the moonlight. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as I stared, I realized my reflection wasn't moving. I blinked, and it didn't blink back. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I told myself I was dreaming, that my sleep-addled brain was playing tricks on me. But when I raised my hand to wave, the reflection raised its hand a second too late. And then it smiled. I wasn't smiling. My heart pounded as I scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over the heap of clothes on the floor. I turned on the light, flooding the room with a warm glow, and stared at the mirror again. This time, everything seemed normal. My reflection moved when I moved, a perfect mimic. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I convinced myself that it had been a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. But the unease lingered, like a faint hum at the back of my mind. I avoided the mirror as much as possible, using the one in the bathroom instead. Still, I couldn't bring myself to take it down. That evening, as I got ready for bed, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. A flicker, like a shadow passing behind me. I spun around, my heart hammering, but my room was empty. "Get a grip, Emily," I muttered to myself, climbing into bed. I left the light on that night, the mirror's surface reflecting the warm glow. I kept my back to it as I fell asleep. The incidents grew more frequent. The reflection would smile or move out of sync, its gestures subtle but deliberate. Once, I swore I saw it mouthing words, but no sound came out. I started hearing faint whispers at night, a sibilant murmur just below the threshold of comprehension. Rachel noticed my exhaustion and asked if I was okay. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," she said over coffee one morning. "It's that stupid mirror," I blurted out before I could stop myself. Her eyes widened, and she leaned in eagerly. "Don't tell me it's actually haunted," she said, half joking but clearly intrigued. I hesitated, then recounted everything. By the time I finished, Rachel looked more serious than I'd ever seen her. "You need to get rid of it," she said firmly. "Throw it out, smash it, I don't care. Just don't keep it in your room." I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't sure I could. The thought of getting rid of the mirror filled me with a strange, inexplicable dread. That night, I decided to confront the mirror. I stood in front of it, my heart pounding, and stared into its depths. My reflection stared back, its expression neutral. "What do you want?" I whispered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, ever so slowly, my reflection's lips curled into a smile. My blood turned to ice as it raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. I didn't move, too terrified to even breathe. The surface of the mirror rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. Before I could react, a hand emerged, pale and identical to mine. It reached for me, and I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet and falling to the floor. When I looked up, the mirror was empty. My reflection was gone. I stayed up all night, clutching a baseball bat and jumping at every creak and shadow. Morning brought no answers, only a gnawing sense of unease. The mirror's surface was normal again, but my reflection didn't return until late afternoon. When it did, it seemed different. Its movements were sharper, more deliberate, as if it were studying me rather than mirroring me. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for something. Watching and waiting. The following night, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. My heart leapt into my throat as I sat up, scanning the room. The mirror was intact, but something was wrong. The air felt heavy, charged with an oppressive energy. And then I saw her. She stood at the foot of my bed, her face an exact replica of mine, but her eyes were wrong. They gleamed with a predatory hunger, cold and unfeeling. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice a twisted echo of my own. Before I could scream, she lunged. The Mirror's Curse, Part 2. Her hands closed around my wrists with a strength I didn't know I had, or rather, that she had. I kicked and thrashed, but it was like fighting a shadow. Every movement I made, she anticipated, countering with terrifying precision. "You don't have to make this difficult," she said, her voice eerily calm. "It'll be over soon." "Over?" I managed to gasp, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" Her smile widened, a grotesque parody of my own. "Your time here. My time, out there." With a surge of adrenaline, I twisted free and stumbled toward the door. My fingers fumbled with the knob, but before I could turn it, she was there, blocking my path. Her movements were impossibly fast, like she wasn't bound by the same rules of physics as I was. "You're not leaving," she said, her tone as cold as the grave. Desperation clawed at my chest. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" "I want what's mine," she replied. "You took it when you brought the mirror here. And now it's time to give it back." "I don't even know what you're talking about," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. Her expression softened for a moment, almost as if she pitied me. "It's not your fault," she said. "But it doesn't change what has to happen." She reached for me again, and I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the baseball bat from beside my bed and swung with all my strength. It connected with a sickening crunch, and she staggered back, clutching her shoulder. "You're only delaying the inevitable," she hissed, her voice distorted. I didn't wait to see what she would do next. I bolted out of the room and down the stairs, my mind racing. The front door was just a few feet away when I felt a cold hand close around my ankle. I fell hard, the breath knocked out of me, and when I turned, she was crawling toward me, her movements unnaturally jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. "You can't run," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "You're mine." Panic surged through me as I kicked her away and scrambled to my feet. My eyes darted around the living room, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. My gaze landed on the fireplace poker, and I grabbed it without hesitation. She lunged at me again, and I swung the poker with all my might. This time, it struck her square in the chest, and she let out an inhuman screech. Her form flickered, like a static-filled TV screen, and for a moment, I thought I saw something beneath the surface, something dark and twisted, a shadow of malice and despair. "You can't kill me," she snarled. "I'm part of you. You're not me." I shouted, bringing the poker down again and again. With each strike, her form grew fainter, her screams more distant. Finally, with one last swing, she shattered into 1,000 shards of light, disappearing into the ether. I collapsed onto the floor, my chest heaving, and stared at the spot where she had been. The house was silent, the oppressive energy lifted. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. But when I looked up at the mirror, its surface was cracked, the frame splintered. And in the fractured glass, I saw her face. She wasn't gone. She was waiting. It had been 2 days since the thing pretending to be me shattered into light. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten much, either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face in the shards of that cursed mirror. But I hadn't dared take it down. Not yet. Something deep within me whispered that destroying it might make things worse, might set her free in a way I couldn't control. Rachel came over when I called, though she was reluctant to believe me. "Look," she said, pacing in front of the mirror as I sat curled up on the couch. "It's just a mirror. A creepy, probably cursed mirror, sure, but it's not," she trailed off as she glanced at her reflection. I saw it too, her movements lagged just a fraction of a second behind the real Rachel. "Okay," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Maybe it's a little cursed." I managed a weak laugh, but my heart was racing. "We have to figure out what to do with it," I said. "I'm scared to smash it, but I can't live like this anymore. It's watching me. I can feel it." Rachel bit her lip, then pulled out her phone. "Let me see if I can find anything about it online. There has to be some kind of exorcism, or ritual, or something, right?" We spent the next several hours scouring forums and obscure websites, looking for any information about haunted mirrors. Most of it was useless: urban legends, ghost stories, dubious advice about sage and salt circles. But then Rachel stumbled upon something that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "Listen to this," she said, scrolling through the post. "Mirrors are not just reflections. They are portals, gateways between realms. To trap a malevolent entity within a mirror, you must bind it with its name." "Its name?" I asked, frowning. Rachel nodded. "According to this, knowing its true name gives you power over it. You can trap it, banish it, maybe even destroy it." But without the name, she trailed off, her expression grim. I thought back to the first time I'd seen the old woman at the flea market. There had been something about her demeanor, a mixture of relief and guilt as she handed over the mirror. What did she know? "We need to go back to the flea market," I said, already grabbing my jacket. The flea market was smaller than I remembered, most of the vendors already packing up for the evening. My stomach sank as we wandered through the aisles, searching for the old woman. Rachel finally spotted her at the edge of the market, hunched over a table of trinkets. "You," I said, approaching her with a mix of desperation and anger. "What did you sell me?" The woman's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "I told you it had been sitting too long," she said. "You wanted it. It's yours now." "It's trying to kill me," I hissed, my voice trembling. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what it was." She sighed, looking older and wearier than before. "It's not the mirror," she said. "It's what's in it. A shadow. A piece of something that should never have crossed over. How do I stop it?" I demanded. The woman hesitated, then leaned in close. "You can't destroy it," she said. "Not completely. But you can bind it. You need its name. And once you've got it, you've got to be strong enough to face it." "How do I find its name?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. She shook her head. "I don't know. But it does. The shadow. If you're clever, you can make it tell you." Rachel and I exchanged a glance. This wasn't the answer we'd been hoping for, but it was all we had. That night, I stood in front of the mirror again. My reflection stared back at me, its expression unreadable. Rachel sat on the bed behind me, clutching a bundle of sage for comfort. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside me. The reflection didn't respond. It just smiled. "I know you can hear me," I said, stepping closer. "If you don't tell me your name, I'll smash this mirror to pieces and bury every shard. You'll never get out." The smile faded. For a moment, the reflection's face twisted, something darker bleeding through. Its eyes gleamed with malice. "You think you have power here," it said, its voice an echo of my own. "You're nothing. Weak. Pathetic. You can't even protect your own mind." It lunged, slamming its hands against the glass. I stumbled back, but Rachel grabbed my arm, steadying me. "Don't let it scare you," she said. I took a deep breath and stepped forward again. "Your name," I demanded. "Tell me, or you'll rot in there forever." The reflection's eyes narrowed. For a moment, I thought it might actually tell me. But then it laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "You want my name?" it sneered. "Come and find it." Before I could react, the mirror's surface rippled like water, and the reflection reached out, grabbing my wrist. I screamed as it pulled me forward, the world around me dissolving into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I stood in a shadowy void, the air thick and oppressive. The ground beneath me was solid but felt wrong, like I was walking on the surface of a nightmare. The reflection stood a few feet away, watching me with a smug grin. "Welcome to my world," it said. "Let's see how strong you really are." The world I'd been dragged into felt like a warped version of my bedroom, the walls bent at odd angles, colors shifted unnaturally, and the air buzzed with a low, unrelenting hum. The reflection stood a few feet away, smirking at me with an expression that was all too familiar and yet utterly alien. "You wanted to find my name?" it taunted, circling me slowly. "Fine. Let's play a game." I took a shaky step back, my eyes darting around for any sign of an exit, but there was nothing. Just the twisted version of my room, stretching endlessly into darkness. "I don't want to play your game," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Just tell me your name." It laughed, a sound that sent icy fingers down my spine. "Oh, but you're already playing," it said. "The rules are simple, find the truth, or lose yourself." Before I could respond, the floor beneath me shifted, and I was falling. The sensation was disorienting, like being sucked through a whirlpool of shadow and light. When I landed, it was in another version of my house, but this one was filled with memories I'd long buried. I was standing in the kitchen, but it wasn't the kitchen I'd known for the past few years. It was the one from my childhood home, down to the faded yellow wallpaper and the creaky wooden floorboards. The air smelled faintly of cookies, and for a moment, I felt a pang of comfort. But then I saw her. At the table sat a younger version of me, no older than 8. She was scribbling furiously in a notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. As I stepped closer, I saw what she was writing, a list of names, each one crossed out. "You won't find it there," a voice whispered behind me. I spun around to see the reflection standing in the doorway, its grin wider than ever. "But keep trying. You've got all the time in the world." Ignoring it, I turned back to the younger me. "What are you doing?" I asked softly. She didn't look up, just kept writing. "I'm trying to name it," she said, her voice eerily calm. "If I name it, it can't hurt me anymore." My chest tightened. This was a memory I'd tried to forget, the nights I'd spent as a child, convinced something lived in the shadows of my room. I'd thought it was just my imagination, a phase I'd outgrown. But now, standing here, it felt all too real. "What's its name?" I pressed, desperation creeping into my voice. The younger me finally looked up, her eyes wide and terrified. "I don't know," she whispered. "But it knows mine." The scene dissolved around me, and I was falling again. This time, I landed in a dark, narrow hallway. Doors lined the walls on either side, each one marked with a name. Some were familiar, friends, family, people I'd known, but others were strangers. The reflection's voice echoed through the corridor. "Pick a door," it said. "Maybe you'll find me. Or maybe you'll find something worse." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the nearest door. It was labeled Rachel. My stomach churned. What happens if I open the wrong one? I asked aloud. "Why don't you find out?" it replied, its laughter reverberating through the hall. Swallowing my fear, I turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a scene I recognized instantly, Rachel and me sitting in her dorm room, studying for finals. It seemed normal at first, but as I stepped closer, I noticed the little details, the way Rachel's reflection in the window didn't match her movements, the faint whispers that filled the air. The Rachel in the memory looked up at me suddenly, her eyes glassy and unfocused. "You're running out of time," she said, her voice distorted. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to the next one. This door bore no name, just a jagged scratch where one should have been. Something about it called to me, and despite my better judgment, I reached for the handle. Inside was a void, darker and deeper than anything I'd ever seen. But in the center of the nothingness, there was a figure. It was hunched over, its form shifting and flickering like a dying flame. "Who are you?" I demanded, stepping into the room. The figure turned slowly, and I realized with a jolt that it was me. Or rather, a twisted, distorted version of me. Its face was hollow, its eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. "You know who I am," it said, its voice a low growl. "I'm everything you fear. Everything you hide." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "Tell me your name," I said, my voice trembling but determined. "I'll end this. I'll end you." The creature's grin widened, its teeth sharp and glinting. "My name? You've known it all along. Say it, and you'll see." Panic surged through me. What did it mean? How could I know its name? But then, a memory surfaced, a name I'd written as a child, scrawled in desperate letters across the pages of a notebook. "Umbral," I whispered, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. The creature screamed, its form shattering into fragments of shadow and light. The void around me began to collapse, and I felt myself being pulled back into the real world. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my bedroom, the mirror intact but silent. Rachel was beside me, her face pale with worry. "What happened?" she asked, clutching my arm. I took a deep, shuddering breath. "I know its name," I said. "And now, I can finish this." The days that followed were marked by unease. The mirror in my room, once a silent witness, now felt like an open wound, raw and waiting. Despite Rachel's insistence that I destroy it, I knew that breaking it wouldn't end the curse. Its hold on me had always been deeper than just glass and silver backing. The name I had spoken, Umbral, lingered in my mind like a ghost, half forgotten and yet omnipresent. I prepared myself for what had to be done. That night, I sat cross-legged in front of the mirror, a lit candle beside me. The flame flickered, its light casting eerie shadows on my walls. Rachel had reluctantly agreed to stay outside my room, though her worried glances through the crack of the door made it clear she thought this was a terrible idea. "Are you sure about this?" she asked one final time, her voice trembling. "Yes," I said firmly, though my insides churned. "If I don't end this, it will keep coming back." With that, I closed the door and faced my reflection. For the first time in days, it mirrored me perfectly. I raised my hand, and it did the same. But I knew better than to trust it. Umbral, I whispered, testing the weight of the name. The reflection's lips did not move. The air in the room grew colder, and the candle's flame sputtered. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned closer. You wanted me to know your name. So here I am. Show yourself. The surface of the mirror rippled like water, and the reflection began to change. My features distorted, twisting into something unrecognizable. Its mouth split into a grin too wide for any human face, and its eyes burned with a yellow light. You've learned my name, it said, its voice a deep rumble that shook the air. But names are only the beginning. The mirror's surface shattered outward, not into shards but into tendrils of shadow that writhed and reached for me. I scrambled backward, my heart pounding, but there was no escape. The shadows coiled around me, pulling me toward the glass. No! I screamed, struggling against the cold, unyielding force. You can't have me. The creature laughed, its voice echoing in my mind. You brought me here, Emily. You spoke my name. Now, you are mine. Desperation surged through me. I forced myself to remember the moments in the twisted hallway, the younger version of myself, the names I'd written down as a child. The creature's power wasn't just in its name, it was in the fear it fed on, the fear I had carried for years. You're wrong, I said, my voice shaking but growing stronger. I'm not yours. You're mine. The shadows paused, as if uncertain. I felt a flicker of hope and pressed on. You've always been a part of me, I continued. My fears, my doubts, my anger. But you don't control me. I control you. The creature's grin faltered. The shadows recoiled slightly, loosening their grip. I seized the moment, reaching deep into myself for the strength to fight back. Umbral, I said again, this time with authority. I command you to leave. The room shook, and the shadows writhed in agony. The creature let out a deafening roar as its form began to disintegrate. The mirror's surface rippled violently, and I felt a force pulling me forward, but this time it wasn't trying to trap me. It was pulling the creature back in. No, it bellowed, its voice fading as it was dragged into the glass. This isn't over. With one final, shuddering gasp, the mirror returned to its original state. The shadows vanished, and the room fell silent. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the mirror. My reflection looked back at me, normal and unremarkable. The oppressive weight that had hung over me for weeks was gone, replaced by a fragile sense of relief. Rachel burst into the room, her face pale with worry. Emily. Are you okay? I nodded, my voice hoarse. It's gone. Her eyes darted to the mirror. Are you sure? Yes, I said, standing shakily. But I think it's time to get rid of this. Together, we carried the mirror outside. Under the cold, clear night sky, we smashed it into countless pieces. As the shards scattered across the ground, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Whatever power the mirror had held was broken. In the days that followed, life began to return to normal. The nightmares stopped, and the sense of being watched faded. But every so often, I caught myself glancing at my reflection, half expecting it to move on its own. I knew the creature's words weren't just a threat, they were a promise. It might be gone for now, but it wasn't destroyed. It was a part of me, lurking in the corners of my mind, waiting for another moment of weakness. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had faced my fears and won. And if Umbral ever returned, would be ready.